Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Gnarly Data Waves. Okay, to give everyone a second as they come on in for this exciting jam-packed presentation. As today we're going to be talking about simplifying data mesh with Dremio's Open Lakehouse. Okay, many very exciting topics. Some of the most exciting topics we have today, which are data mesh and data lakehouse, all in one presentation. So stay tuned and on the edge of your seats. But before we start our feature presentation, let me make a few announcements. One, talking about the Data Lakehouse, you probably should get your hands on the Data Lakehouse and try it out with Dremio's Data Lakehouse platform. And the way you can do that is by heading over to dremio.com and clicking on the test drive button, where you can try out Dremio at no cost, no obligation, run a few queries, see what the big Data Lakehouse deal is about. So head over to dremio.com and try out Dremio Test Drive today. Also, make sure to pick up an early copy of Apache Iceberg, the definitive guide. You can get the early release copy. We just added 2 more chapters to the early release, and you can get that by scanning that QR code. That edition was actually made this morning. So if you scanned it before, it's time to scan it again. Okay. And we're going to have many great episodes coming here in Gnarly Data Wave. So keep coming every Tuesday, same bad time, same bad place. So next week, we'll be talking about best practices for building a data lakehouse on ADLS for all you Azure fans out there. Then the week after that, I will be talking about versioning data in the data lakehouse. So talking about the differences, pros and cons of versioning at the file level, the table level, catalog versioning, your Iceberg tables. Then we'll be talking about Merce's journey to unified analytics with Dremio and generative AI. We'll be having Apache Iceberg offers hours. So if you have Apache Iceberg questions, we got Apache Iceberg question answers. And the following week, we'll be talking about reducing your total cost of ownership with Dremio, simplifying data governance at scale across all your data, and using Dremio and DuckDB together for maximum data lakehouse goodness. So check out all these presentations over the next couple months by coming back every Tuesday. And again, also make sure to subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts, to Gnarly Data Waves. Also, Dremio is going to be appearing at many events. So we have these AWS events in New York, okay, on July 25th and July 26th. So if you happen to be in town, check those out. Also, Dremio will be at Coalesce by DBT in San Diego, at Big Data London in London, and Big Data and AI in Paris. So if you're at any of these events, make sure to check out the Dremio booth, pick up some cool Dremio swag, and say hi. And with no further ado, let's get to our feature presentation. We'll be talking about simplifying data mesh with Dremio's Open Data Lakehouse with Nik Acheson, Senior Director of Product Management and Go-to-Market Strategy here at Dremio, and Tony Truong, Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Dremio. With that, with no further ado, Nik, Tony, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to pull my presentation up here now. So I guess just to jump right in, quick intro to me. I've actually lived mostly on the other side of the table with you all. So I have owned, run, managed, and driven both large-scale digital and data transformations, owning data analytic platforms globally for large enterprises like Nike, Zendesk, American Eagle, Philips, and many others. So prior to joining Dremio a few months ago, I was also the CDO of Okera, who was recently acquired by Databricks. And over here at Dremio now, part of my responsibilities is making sure that, frankly, we're building the right things at the right time for the right customer with the right purpose. And being able to connect with you all to be able to continue to help drive and enable your own individual transformation journeys. So feel free to connect with me and happy to help look at how your journey is running with Dremio or even share lessons learned. So as we jump into the data mesh, I think the most important thing is just kind of get some quick context of where we came on this journey. And the first part, if we just look, right, everybody knows the old school pain of our classical data warehouses, right, with fixed compute and storage. You just kind of continue to buy more boxes, looking for more space, operating on-prem, right? And with the emergence of Hadoop, we really started shifting into starting to look at individual pieces of that ecosystem and continuing to optimize, right? The problem, though, is even a lot of these open source tools are coming out, right? There's a little less dependencies. It was still this massive fixed storage and compute capacity, right? Still mostly on-prem. And not only is it harder to use, I think in some cases where I worked, we had 50, 60 people just supporting an individual implementation for an individual business area, right? And I think this is where the blow up then started going. Well, how do we actually start separating storage and compute? Right, and you got companies like Snowflake being able to deliver you cloud agnostic storage and speed, so that way you can continue to leverage data across your whole universe and ecosystem, right? And I think this is where we're now starting to see, though, a shift into the data lakehouse, right? Because those patterns are still very cost prohibitive. My favorite example is when I was at Nike, I had an intern save me over $15 million in my Snowflake costs, and we still didn't even convert that intern into a full-time job, right? It's just so expensive. And even then, it's still locked in proprietary systems. So though I had more flexibility with my business and more independence, it's still just, there has to be a better way, right? And this is where we see the Lakehouse coming in. So much more open formats, much more open tables, looking at not needing to having to copy or move your data across your ecosystem, and looking at the best breed processing engines and platforms across your whole data architecture with interoperability. And where we see things continuing to move forward, especially with data mesh at such a prominent orientation, is this autonomous lakehouse, an autonomous semantic layer, right? Treating data as code and treating data as a product, which is one of the core pillars of mesh that we'll cover. So I'll save a little bit of that in a second. Now, all this is still happening, right? While people are trying to do more with less, right? Teams are still getting crushed with PagerDuty tickets in the middle of the night. And we need more access as the business, right? We need to still deliver at a much higher rate and velocity, but all that debt is still sitting there, right? So how do the centralized teams continue to govern? Or how do the individual teams that are consuming centralized assets govern their individual data products themselves as they're delivering to the business for now mission critical applications and analytic reports? So everyone generally feels and looks like this in my mind, right? So, ecosystems are complex. As I mentioned with Snowflake, as my example earlier, we had 4, 5, 6, 7, 50 copies of the same data that was coming out of S3 alone inside Snowflake, right? And the costs just continue to skyrocket, right? And then you get locked into proprietary formats, right? How do you secure all those copies of data? And one of my favorite ones is when Tableau came out with a lot of their data engineering functionality in their platform, right? All that semantic intelligence and all those customizations, all that could be also shared outside of your individual auth-in and auth-z or entitlements platforms. So again, it just creates more and more complexity and more challenges. So this is where the Lakehouse really fits in. So being able to unify that data across your whole ecosystem without having to move it, regardless of where it's stored, right? Dremio being one of the few or only platforms that allows you to interact with data, whether it's on premises, in the cloud, or even in hybrid, right? And the same thing under deployment patterns, being able to deploy both on-prem and in cloud and interact with that data across your ecosystem. And then what does it look like to be able to treat that data as an asset, as code? So we're going to jump a little bit more into these in a second. And to make it really simple, right, going from the really ugly spaghetti chart of a few slides ago to here, right, being able to access data wherever it is, any data, right, being able to create logical data domains of that, and then letting the individual business build out their own individual data products over that data that's being treated as an asset now. And then looking at how do we add things like reflections to be able to make the queries and cost nature of being able to execute your business much more sustainable and faster, right? And all of that being able to be accessed through a unified access layer. And the unique part of Dremio from a lot of our competitors here too is it doesn't all have to live inside the Dremio ecosystem, right? You can run a Lakehouse and a mesh together. It's not the same thing. So you can optimize your ecosystem while still connecting to external ones and using things like Dremio to Dremio connectors, right? Or even connectors into outside systems. You can find value faster. And that's where I'm going to show in a few slides here of where we've seen a lot of our customers be able to go on their data mesh journey and how to, one of my favorite sayings is, how long is it going to take me? How fast can I get there? And how much is it going to cost? Right? I want all three of those. Deliver value fast while delivering transformation in the mid to long term. And I do want to highlight 3 of our customers that have really kind of done this well. You've probably seen, if you haven't, I would go check it back out. One of our recent shows with MSK. Really, at the end of the day, they looked at their individual patterns. They came here and said, hey, we just want to be able to connect into a unified access layer and virtualize all of our data sets. And our answer to them was, that's the first step. And you'll see a little bit more here. And where they're at now in their journey is they're looking at their whole data architecture and ecosystem and saying, we do have better ways. And it's not just better ways to execute, it's also better ways to transform their business. And I think that's where you've seen in areas like TransUnion. with these new patterns, they were able to save over 13 data engineers with Dremio at their core. And it wasn't a matter of just, hey, here's additional cost savings and efficiencies. It's what can you now do with those people, not just resources? What can you do with those people that you couldn't do before? And whether that's through technical I couldn't do, or it's now I have capacity to do. And their answer was they start transforming their own business. And through that, they're transforming the world, promoting economic opportunity globally. And the same thing with Shell, right? They're using these new platforms and patterns to be able to redefine and open up new business areas for them at mostly the same cost, if not less, than running their previous architecture and ecosystem. And I think that's the power of data mesh. Data mesh, in my mind, as much as I talk about it, is it is a process or pattern that is unique to each individual implementation, and it is a journey, no different than agile or digital transformation. So I think that's the one thing I would keep in your mind is how are you using these patterns to transform not just delivering easier, better experiences internally, but how are you doing it to transform your business and how your business interacts with your individual teams as well. So data mesh at the end of the day is really driving by 4 key principles. Data as a product, and I do want to highlight the difference of data products and data as a product in a second. Self-service data platforms, domain ownership, and federated computational governance. So we get a lot of questions of how does Dremio help deliver our data mesh? So I'm going to jump through here pretty quick. And again, Tony's going to give a demo here in a few minutes, but I do want to ask, and I'll say, Alex, cut me off at any time. If anybody has any questions whatsoever, good, bad, or indifferent, throw them in the chat. I love to be interrupted. So this presentation is for you. And however I can make it more unique and specific to where you're at in your journey, feel free to interrupt and we can go and kind of customize this for you all. So data as a product. I mentioned earlier, we talk about data products, and to be frank, I've confused a lot of people when I got into this space and started talking about data mesh and data fabric and so forth. And we kept talking about data as an asset and data products and treating data as a product. And I want to separate those two and kind of help you make it easier to be able to talk to your individual constituents too. So if you think about data products, right, at the end of the day, a data product solves a business problem and or is monetized, right? Every data asset you create or every piece of data or view or otherwise, they're not all data products. So data product is that final thing that people are consuming that delivers actual business value to your organization. And those should be searchable, right? You should be able to create them, share them, measure them, manage them, right? In a data mesh, the producer and consumer starts to really come together, right? So whether you're a data engineer starting today, looking for the individual data within your organization, so you can start improving on the experiences for your customer or for your analyst, or you're the analyst itself building out a new model, or a data scientist looking at how you can improve churn and contraction modeling, right? Or even then into the business consumer going, hey, what insights are available across my ecosystem? All of that should be searchable and easily consumable. And you want to be able to differentiate those things that are, certified and governed versus just, people being able to do exploration. Now, what's the difference though between those two assets? This is how Dremio treats data as a product, right? So as we open sourced and donated Nessie, which is our Arctic platform in preview today, we talked about treating data as code, right? So no different than you would think about how you would deliver a software product. You want to think about data products the same way. So when you treat data as a product, you're thinking about things like quality, trust, right? You're thinking about consistency and discoverability across an enterprise. So that way, when an engineer or an analyst joins or creates new assets over top, new data products over top of your data, there is trust on the underlying source. And I think that's one of the key where we're seeing a lot of things come around data contracts and so forth. And it's super interesting topics that we can dive into in future episodes as well. But just take a quick step back. There's data as a product and there's data products. So treating data as a product is really taking product thinking and applying that to your data and treating it with the same respect that you would with the individual software that your company serves and or consumes. And those data products are that high-level asset that's being consumed by a business that solves a tangible problem, right? So those things can't change without understanding the material impact to your users or your consumers. So the self-serve data platform, right? So at the simplest form for us, it's through our unified access layer, right? You want to be able to directly self-service, whether it's consuming data, whether it's building out an analytic asset or building out data science models. You want to be able to do all that without reaching out to centralized teams. And you can do that through Dremio's unified access layer. Now, data for all consumers to us really starts meaning not just delivering to that producer and consumer, but all the way up through the business. So being able to give direct CLI or API access to the data itself, right? Interacting with sub-second speed with SQL, or not even just moving to a low or no code experience, but also utilizing things like generative AI. And with Dremio, part of what we want to do too is not always have to make you interact with that data through our individual platforms. So with that single click to be able to switch over to Tableau, if you're a business user interacting with the data, all of that continues to get logged and accelerated by Dremio without the need for expensive, hard to govern extracts. And then reflections, right? So again, whether you were in that experience inside of Tableau or Power BI, we want to make that just go extremely fast for our users. And we want to do that in the most autonomous way possible. You shouldn't have to always set up your individual cache or materialized views, or in our case, reflections. Those things should just work, right? And it should be simple to manage and very easy to be able to regulate and audit within your ecosystem. Again, it should be easy. It should just work. So domain ownership. The first part here, right, is just thinking about data stewardship. A lot of companies are still in this first part of their discovery, where data stewards are often the individual analysts or engineers that are registering the data within a particular domain. And more mature organizations are still in that journey, but now they're thinking about having 1, 2, 3 people within an individual domain space, looking at and managing the collective data products of their space. And then that starts getting separated from the individual. How does it mean to treat data as a product versus data products? So the data steward will often sit at the data product level, where the engineering teams will directly interact with them to do that, treating data as a product piece, right? So making sure that the pipelines are continuously running, or making sure that there's no changes to the underlying data structure, right? That's going to impact the data products that are being generated over top of that. And that should be much easier now because it's not so much pipeline management, because you're not having to move data across your ecosystem the way you used to. So federated computational governance then. So, right, we now know and can more easily see the lineage of your data moving across from environments, right? That should be much easier because you're not having to have that crazy spider web or spaghetti chart that we showed before, right? So data should just land inside your ecosystem environment and be available for the key data products or use cases that are being delivered for your business. Now, within that, it's much easier now to start governing it. And so the federated computational governance, and my fun shot to that, as much as I love Zhamak, is it's a very academic feeling word. And to make it simple for folks, it's really just how do you have a centralized governance ecosystem where you have the same entitlements and services being used across. So Dremio and our authentication and authorization should be no different than what you'd be using in Tableau, which should be no different than what you'd be using in S3 and so forth, right? It should all consume a centralized governance model. However, the federated part of that then says is, well, as a domain owner, I want to be able to actually manage the individual privileges of my assets inside my domain, because I'm worried about things like having overprivileged user access across my ecosystem, right? I want to go, if someone's consuming my data product, I want to be able to audit all those consumers. I want to see how often this asset's being used. I want to see what parents or children's are interacting with that asset, and I want to be able to adjust, right? And I know that better than any centralized team ever would. So I should be able to, as a steward or owner of my data product, be able to control that. So that's what federated computational governance provides within a data mesh architecture. So journey to data mesh, there's 3 phases I think most companies end up going through. And to be super clear, phase 2 and 3 is an iterative process. You keep kind of going back through there. So the phase 1 is the easy one. This is where most folks come into a data mesh journey, where they're looking at things like virtualization, right? And they think about it as classical virtualization is I want to connect my data and then I think I'm done, right? And sure, that happens, right? You can register and unify your data, right? You don't really want to create any impact to your production systems, right? But most of the time, this results in pretty good ad hoc capabilities, right? You get access to data that you couldn't get access to before, right? And sometimes the business is happy. But what often happens is the performance isn't fully enabled, right? And this is where I would challenge versus other competitors is look at the backend technology that helps you execute the unified access layer. And I think this becomes even more visible now as you shift into phase 2, right? So I've connected the data, now what? Now we're talking about a lakehouse, right? So you have the basic foundation of a mesh because now you have full visibility of your architecture and ecosystem, right? But now you're sitting here going like, there's got to be a better way to still execute, right? I've got that data connected now. And a lot of folks, when they're on like a AWS first journey, right? This is where they start experiencing that type of pain where, hey, I don't think my performance of a Athena or of a Trino or otherwise is meeting my now expectations of that same level of performance I had in the warehouse, right? So this is where you start looking at your lakehouse and saying, okay, cool. Now I want to start reducing my TCO, right? This is where MSK was going. Do I really need this whole Kafka ecosystem, right? I had a team before of about 19 people between my Kafka management and then my Kafka connectors. And you sit here and like, do I really need that many people to move data, right? So as you start going, well, I don't have as much strain on my ecosystem now. I don't need that large of a team. Then you sit here and say, well, what can I now do better? And this is phase 2 for me, right? This is where I go, how do I get more efficient? How do I bring in a modern data stack? How do I deliver better, faster, smarter than I was doing before? And this is where I'd say is if you're coming into this journey, one of the first recommendations I give you as you're in that first phase is to prioritize and look at where is the maturity of my business, but also on the other side is where's the largest impact I can make to them, right? I won't say the name, but I had a previous company I worked with. They were like, honestly, we just don't care about the marketing data. We've got to get our sales data done right? The K10 can't be wrong, and we can never have Salesforce go down. I'm like, okay, those are great requirements. So I can raise our maturity here in a phase 2, right? Shift them into a phase 3, which is now, hey, now I want an open architecture and ecosystem, but I'm going for speed and impact now. So that's phase 2. And this is where I'd say is, a couple of examples our customers given us is, with Renaissance Re before, look at their performance, right? And then as they shifted into phase 2 after connecting, I mean, the chart speaks for itself, right? Even specifically here, right? Where we looked at one of our other recent customers sent this over unsolicited to us and said, hey, look, with this new pattern, just on infrastructure alone, this is their savings, right? And this doesn't even count now the savings that they would have on their TCO between data movement tools and through the semantic layer that they were purchasing and more, right? And the same thing here, right, is one of the things I loved at the Databricks Summit that I was at a couple of weeks ago was JPMC saying, we're not moving all of our data inside you, right? So when you look at the distributed nature of dealing with data, this was an unsolicited send over from one of our other customers, and they just said, look, without moving all the data in here, look at the performance that we were able to gain with Dremio. And to be super clear, our recommendation is not to just rip out Databricks, right? There's definitely a better together story here, and they're great at what they do. So it's really about moving into that, which is this third phase of an enterprise data mesh, is continue to think about operating within an open format, open ecosystem, right? Best of breed processes, committing to those early requirements and priorities, which is I want to have flexibility of my ecosystem and deliver better, smarter, faster, and better outcomes and experiences for my business users, not just then the analyst and data engineer in that phase 1. So, and that's where we usually see the result here, right? Is enterprise products are now published, they're searchable, consumable, right? You have full self-service across decentralized teams. And whether that's an engineer directly working at the CLI, right? Or all the way up to a business user using generative AI within the platform and not getting themselves in trouble, right? I want to underline that last part probably 3 or 4 times. So Tony's going to shoot over and do the demo. I am, again, happy at any given point to be able to answer any questions whatsoever. As I mentioned, a data mesh journey is a journey, no different than a digital transformation journey. You have to find spots to start. You have to measure the impact and value, and then you're going to continuously iterate, right? There's no real done, but there has to be delivered value fast, right? Again, how long is it going to take? How fast can we get there? And how much is it going to cost me? And if we can do that in an iterative way that's driving new experiences, I think that's where we look at things like, your MSKs are going, hey, not only are we saving on platform cost, not only is it much easier to interact with, but I think we're actually transforming lives. And I think that's, if you can tell that story, I think that's where data mesh gets so powerful. So Tony, why don't you show them some stuff?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Nick. All right, everyone. So for the demo today, a little bit of context. The background here is we're going to be doing a retail analytics example. We have over 10 terabytes of data representing 65 million customers and over 500,000 items and sales data spanning across 3 different channels. So it's web, catalog, and store. So in this environment here, you see Dremio spaces. Think of spaces as your domain. So for the sake of this demo, I have one called product marketing. So this is a folder that I created, but you can rename it to be whatever you want, how it fits in your organization and based on your maturity path with your data platform journey. So what I want to do is, as a data consumer, I want to go in and understand my sales data. I see here that the data providers have created this environment for me. And then over here, you see the wiki. So this describes what the domain data is about. So this is pretty generic. I wrote your data is here, retail analytics, and they provided additional context. So I go and click on the sales folder. And you look over here, you can also repurpose the wiki as a business glossary. So we've had customers come to us and say, hey, we have data everywhere across the enterprise, and we also have a separate business glossary, which is using on multiple platforms. And so they use Dremio to define all the business glossary. So in this example, we defined what all these terms mean. So now, as a data consumer who has a business context, I can go in and understand this a little bit better. And what I want to understand now is, what is our net profit for the web channel? So there's 2 ways for us to go about this. So this was a data product that was created for me ahead of time. I can go in and run this query. And so as a non-technical data consumer, I don't know any SQL. So I'm just running this and I know that I'm getting the data that I need. So then what I'm seeing here is I have data from 1998 to 2003. It's counting all of the records that we had for transactions and then the net profit. As you can tell, this business is going downhill because it's very much negative. And so, yeah, so this is one way we can understand the data. And even before that, let's take a step back. If I was a data consumer, I wanted to validate the integrity of this data. I want to understand a little bit more about it. So I click on this, open lineage. And I see here that this net profit table, it's being joined between 2 tables, web sales and on the date table. So if you see here, this is data sitting in S3, and this is actually an Iceberg table. Okay. And then we can also add additional business context in the wiki for this at the individual table level. So for here, I can add the query in case they want to understand the query a little bit better. This is listed here. And then going back over here, we have another example where we're using catalog sales. I want to understand who are my top customers. And so I'll kind of jump straight into this piece here. So this is the query that's being run. So I'm looking at the top 50 customers of all time across catalog sales, and I'm going to run it. While that's running, I'm going to show you where this data is coming from. And so we understand that a lot of customers may already be using other table formats such as Delta Lake. And so we allow them to work with data that's sitting in other table formats, so like Iceberg. And so we see here in this top customers catalog sales table, we have data sitting in Delta Lake. So this is catalog sales, and we have customer data that's joined with Iceberg. Okay. So while this is running, we can see here that, this additional wiki. So I added that Tony is the data owner, and adding a little bit more context to this describes the top 50 customers across catalog sales. So this Usually with the demos, you know how it always is when you run it live, sometimes it doesn't work the way you want it. So usually this was supposed to run in like 15 seconds, but it returns the records. So now I'm going to show you another example here. So this is a sneak preview of one of our recent generative AI features. So I'm going to go in here now. As an enterprise customer, I have data that's sitting in Snowflake, and my team just recently migrated from an on-premise data warehouse to Snowflake. And there's no way in heck I'm going to go in and say, hey, can you migrate data from Snowflake back into Data Lake or into like a downstream tool for me? So my data providers gave me access to data that's sitting in Snowflake. And so what I wanted to do is I want to understand give me a list of all the products that are running low in inventory. So less than 5, but not at 0, and show me a count of that. So I'm going to go in and go to Snowflake. This was created as a data source. So I'm going to go into the inventory table. We're going to drag this over to our generative AI feature here. So this is the inventory table in Snowflake. And then we have data that's sitting in Iceberg, which will be in let me check my notes here. This is on the item table. And for example, like MSK, right? They have a mixture of technical data consumers and non-technical, like physicians and front desk folks, right? So as somebody who may not know SQL, or I may have forgotten SQL because it's been a while, I'm going to ask Dremio to run me a query. So I want you to find me all the products that have less than 5 inventory count, but not at 0, and show the inventory. And the cool thing about this is you ask it natural questions here, natural language, and then it'll populate the SQL code for you. So I'm gonna go ahead and run this. All right, so now we see these are all the items that are running low. Okay, and then just to kind of show you a little bit more context here, I pre-created this earlier, but you could go in and see that this is the code that was being run. And then the data, this is the full data mesh architecture here, because we're not relying on IT to copy data. We're just querying the data where it lives, and we're using Dremio as that unified access layer. So this low product inventory table is joined with data that's sitting on Snowflake and in Iceberg. Okay. And so like the other examples I showed you, you can add additional business context, and then you can also modify the query if the generative AI features is not exactly what you're looking for, but it's close enough. So play around with that. Let us know how you guys think about the feature, and we're always continuing to improve that as we go. Okay, and then just to show you a quick example on governance, right? So in Dremio, you could also create access to certain folks based on their user level. So if you are in the admin or public group, you can create these roles ahead of time. I don't have permission to create these roles because of my level, but you could go in and create new users, new roles, and new privileges. Do they have permission to create a user, create a project, create a catalog, configure things? And then when you create your data products, you can actually set permissions at the spaces level. So you can do it at the folder level here, grant privileges, and then to get more granular, you can do it at the data product level. So very similar there. And that's our demo today for a data mesh. Let's see if we have any questions, and I'll go ahead and we'll jump over to Q&A.
Ready? If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box. You'll see there at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar, there's a Q&A section. Put them there. We'll relay them to Nik and Tony. Now, basically, Tony, a couple questions. Like with the Dremio, when it comes to governing, not only can I like govern like spaces and subfolders and data sets, but are there ways like let's say I have like PII information in a data set. Is there ways for me like to make sure that the wrong people don't see that?
Yeah, so you can do encryption at the table and column level. And so we have data masking capabilities. So that's, if I'm understanding your question, that's what you're asking, right?
Yep. And then we see another question from Dalong Li. Is the AI feature based on ChatGPT?
So I'll jump on this one. So Dremio is exploring a number of LLM options available. So yes, we are currently exploring and utilizing GPT. That said, we are continuing to also look at and create our own LLM options that we can also enable our own individual customers to explore. So we have a lot of announcements coming around generative AI in general. And our intention is not to have really any dependency on any individual platform. So a lot more announcements coming there, so stay tuned.
Yep, and there was just another question. What are the list of data sources that can be part of the mesh? Example was shown for Snowflake. So Tony?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, so we have Snowflake. We have the cloud object store, but we also have customers that have data that needs to stay on-prem. So if you have SQL Server, you have Hive, you have Hadoop, so like HDFS, and then we also support metastores. So the catalogs, right? We have Glue, we have Arctic, Project Nessie, and then we also have, I'm trying to see what else I'm missing, Hive Metastore. And then we also have things like Oracle, Exadata, and then like Azure Synapse. So depending on what your use cases are, we'll have providers or data connectors for those. So if there's any that I've missed, Alex, Nick, feel free to jump in, but those are a handful if I can call off the top of my head.
Yep. Yeah, basically in general, Dremio connects to a variety of databases, data warehouses, and data lakes. So, and there's also like, especially in Dremio software, there's like a sea of connectors out there. Created by the community. But next question, how do you handle queries across multiple domains with each having its own incompatible glossaries, even with join column values or even join column values that are encoded differently?
I was gonna say, Alex, do you want to take the first cut at that one, or?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that one get you excited.
Yeah. Bottom line is this: like with Dremio, you can do a lot of that last mile ETL work straight from Dremio. So, for example, if I have data in multiple domains, and there's like a certain table, but I need maybe the columns to be named a little bit differently, or the data to be presented a little bit differently, so that way it can join better with another data set. I can create a view on that data set and then join the views from to make that data consistent without necessarily having to make a copy from it. That's like the beauty of Dremio's no copy infrastructure. You can essentially get the data in the shape that you need it for different use cases, but you don't have to duplicate the data. And if you're doing it all from one Dremio project and each domain has its own space, long as you have access to the data set, you can create your own views from it to satisfy the jobs you want. And then you can accelerate those joins by using data reflections to create the materializations on those joins to accelerate BI dashboards or any other use cases for those joins. So yeah.
So I'd love to yes and that. Just to be clear, my answer is yes, and I'm going to add. I want to give a little shout out to our partners too, because Dremio is not going to be the end all be all part of your overall data architecture and ecosystem. So we did actually just announce, and we have more coming out there, a partnership with DBT as well. So as Alex mentioned, you can absolutely do those last mile transforms inside Dremio. If there's a lot more, because as I said, that the use cases matter. So understanding a use case, if there is a large, heavy workload that you have to do to be able to normalize those assets, utilizing a platform like a DBT, we can still connect into that and enable a continued any additional transforms over top of it. So again, Dremio is to sit here as that unified tier, which enables you to do all the things that Alex mentioned thereafter too. So again, I think the use case matters, and this is where also partnerships and connectors matter too.
Awesome. And let's see here. Any other questions? Again, if you have any questions, put them either in the chat or in the Q&A box. Okay, because if you got questions, we got answers. Okay, so we would love to supply you some of those answers out of that big bag of answers we have over here to the side.
Maybe while we wait, one of the questions I get asked every time I go in and chat with a team is, where do I start? And my favorite answer to say, if you need me to tell you without understanding your business, I'll just say, start with financial data. Right? At the end of the day, your K10 can't be wrong, right? Or your sales yesterday can't be wrong. Or, what are those assets that you're delivering that are running all of your complex, pipelines and workloads every single night between, 1 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the morning, and then you get yelled at or woken up in the middle of the night because something failed and your business user is pissed off, right? Or something's 2% off and you're having to go Splunk on it. I think those are the areas that drive not just value to the business user for consistency, simplifying your architecture, and getting more trust so that frankly you get more funding to go after additional things, but it also lowers your PagerDuty tickets. That's important too, right? So that's what I say is if you're not sure where to start in the finance area, and it's also the easiest area to get individual data stewards signed up for actually owning the underlying data and the data products itself too, right? Somebody's in trouble if the numbers are off from yesterday on your sales data. So from there, it's just continuing within bounded context to mature out your ecosystem, whether it's you're eliminating your pain or the business's pain or opening up new opportunities. I think that's where I would apply my first data mesh principles. And I think that's frankly where I've continued to get funding everywhere I've been.
Awesome. That is fantastic. Cool. And in that, so now let's say, what's the first step of taking the first step? So basically, someone takes that advice, they're going to go apply those data mesh principles to their financial data. What will be the first step that they should take in that process?
Yeah. So this is where you sit here and go like, what's the outcomes you're driving for your business, right? I like to celebrate anybody that ever gets architecture funded, but my fun comment is nobody ever funds architecture, right? So right, every data team is, over capacity, way over capacity and over committed, and being able to support their work, just it's getting harder and harder, back to that spaghetti sheet. So I think this is where you have the opportunity, is where you have flexibility to be able to explore, go after your pain points, right? But connect your pain points to actual business outcomes. And that's how you'll continue to be able to go after those. So if I go back to the finance one, is if your PagerDuty tickets are incessantly around your Salesforce to S3 to moving over to GCS, where you're modeling them, landing back into S3, where now a Tableau dashboards populating over it. That's a very easy example for me because I lived that one twice with that exact architectural flow, and they broke in both companies. That's the opportunity where I go, hey, I can deliver this asset for you every single day on time. Both of those businesses I worked at immediately funded that project, right? And my team, in one of those cases, I think we had measured out in one quarter, had 1,600 PagerDuty tickets tied to it. So very easy place to start. Business wants to gain trust. You want to not lose engineers from being on call and getting miserable in the middle of the night, right? And you want to create a solid foundation to deliver the next outcomes that you're going after. So this is where I say is identify the pain on both sides and find everybody a win. And then that simplification of that pattern is only going to continue to unlock everyone. So I don't know that fully answered your question, Alex, but it's really going after the key use cases.
Yep, no, that was fantastic. And we have another question from Patrick Skelly. It looks like data mesh depends heavily on data accuracy in source systems. How does data mesh handle data curation, data quality, master data?
Do you want to take your first cut, Alex, and then I can jump on too?
Okay. Bottom line is this: like when you're taking a data mesh approach, like you're divvying up the work. Like I always like to think about it as like the division of labor. So the idea is that now you've gotten to a point where you have so much data that a centralized IT team just doesn't have the context, the manpower to do that quality. So when you break it up, when you actually apply the data mesh principles and you have that division of labor between your domains, you're more likely to have better data curation, better data quality, because the people who are working on it understand the context of that data better. So basically, it does depend on quality of data, but you're more likely to have quality of data because you have that division of labor.
Yeah, I generally take two different approaches to this one. I have my saucy answer that I like to just fire up and stoke an audience with, which is where I'd say is with contemporary data platform processes and patterns, I think things like master data management becomes different, right? So it's like, how do I think about data as it comes into my ecosystem? How do I effectively pub sub every interaction into my data catalog, my metadata catalog, right? Understanding business and systems level metadata. How do I properly tag and understand the assets that are then getting delivered to the business, right? And data products, right? And who owns mastering that data and then the underlying data with that is being created, right? Back to that, treating data as a product and then building data products over top of it. I think if you have a lot of those foundational elements done correctly, so simple things like, again, everything getting pub sub back into a centralized metadata service or a data catalog service. Doing those things right, start shifting how we think about accuracy and how we think about things like how is quality and curation generated and even measured. So I think that's, as you start thinking about data products, maybe not even data mesh, but a data product, this is where I think you're starting to see emergence now and much more importance around data contracts, right? And understanding the upstream and downstream dependencies of your data that you're delivering to the business. And why I frankly think things, a platform like Nessie and Arctic is so important, because you don't see all of those dependencies, right? It's hard to map all of those. Somebody changing one field in a Salesforce table, right, has massive impact all the way downstream, and not everyone's going to be in that cab, right? So can I roll those changes back, right? What does that experience look like? So I think, data mesh overall goes, hey, instead of thinking about it all as one big organic ecosystem, can I look at it as many different minor components and then create easier ownership of those components? And how do I manage that? So just to say, I think things like master data management becomes a little different. And it's now more about how do I think about treating data as an asset and the data products itself the same way I would treat software. So it just changes how you value data and its relationship across the business.
Yeah, and I'd also add on top of that, Nick, that was a great response. Like, we have customers who originally had a centralized IT team, and they were doing all the traditional, taking tickets, but they were so overwhelmed. But with data mesh, they were able to repurpose them. So they didn't get rid of the data engineer. They repurposed them to be support with data consumers and providers. And on the data provider side, they're helping data providers with curating data, making sure that data from source aligns with where it needs to be into the target system, making sure that data is accurate. So it's more manpower to help make sure that data is higher quality for the consumers.
Awesome. One last question for you guys. From Patrick Skelly, can we expect Dremio to get better with data cataloging? Right now, it's all manual. Can we expect the platform to use AI for cataloging or add annotation to existing lineage?
Yeah, so solid job there, Patrick, trying to get a view into our roadmap. I will take the bait though. So there's a couple of different layers of the answer. The easiest one is, yes, we're actually looking right now to be able to release features around with generative AI to be able to actually do auto cataloging. So the moment you either create a new asset or a data product, being able to automatically or automatically catalog that content, and then being able to do additional things like tagging and so forth, right? And all of that, to the other part of your question, should integrate into a core enterprise catalog as well. So we are continuing to expand on those integrations with our partners. And there are things you can do today. This is what I'd say is if you wanted to deeper dive into this, we'd be happy to talk about how some of our customers are using the platform. But a simple one, if you just wanted to immediately hit, you can link in Calibra, for example, with business terms and glossary, and then connect it there. So Calibra does struggle, right, with things like embedded SQL, right? So being able to use capabilities within Dremio to be able to capture the lineage better than frankly you would grab with the Calibra, but being able to also then connect into your terms and glossary with Calibra and those workflows into Dremio. All of that is available to do today. And we're going to continue to make that a better experience and also add additional catalogs as well. And obviously on top of that, our own catalog. So I hope that answers your question. What, Alex or Tony, if you have anything to add?
Nope, not mine. I thought that was great. That was fantastic.
That's a good response. Thanks, Nick.
With that, I think there's no more questions. So I want to say thank you, Tony and Nick, for being on the show today. Always a delight. It was. I always like to say educational, enlightening, and entertaining. And we look forward to having you guys on again. Next week we'll be talking about building a data lakehouse on ADLS for all the Azure users in the audience. So come back next week, same bad time, same bad place. But otherwise, guys, have a great day. And again, this will be posted on Spotify and on YouTube within 24 to 48 hours if you want to watch this again. And yeah, I'll see you all next week. And thank you again, Nick and Tony.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone.